Hello, this is Artemis_anime, and today I am reading a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle fic called A Minute From Home by Tazai. Summary. In another universe, Donnie followed Splinter through the right tunnel along with his little brother toddling neatly along behind him. Mikey didn't fall and his glasses didn't break, and Donnie didn't get lost. They made it back to their Stormtime lair safely and fell asleep in a turtle pile with Raffi and Leo snug and warm and exactly where they belonged. Nothing changed them, and they were never apart. And this one, they went the wrong way. Notes: this was meant to be a little drabble, and it got away from me in the end. Quell a surprise. Title borrowed from The View Between Villages by Noah Kahn. Once, when Donnie and Mikey were very, very small, they went the wrong way. The tunnel they lived in at the time was safe and clean and conveniently located near thrift stores and food banks, but during heavy rains it tended to flood. So Splinter would pack up the few precious items he could not stand to lose into a rucksack, and then bundle up his turtles and lead them away to a safer place to wait out the storm. They had a lot of little halfway homes like that before they finally settled in the abandoned subway station that would become their forever home. At barely 3 years old, Michelangelo was very far-sighted. The condition of his eyes made things in front of him look very blurry. Figuring that out was actually a condition and not silly Angie being his silly self took a lot of trial and error on their poor father's part. There was no conceivable way for Splinter to provide him with prescription lenses, but the frames he stole from a corner store seemed to do the trick. Mikey would probably grow out of the condition eventually, but when he was little, he depended on his glasses, and Donnie was supposed to be holding his hand. Donnie only had one younger brother to look after. He couldn't imagine being Leo and being responsible for all three, but even just one was hard sometimes. Donnie's brain liked to outrun him, darting away after hundreds of things all at once, and sometimes he forgot what he was supposed to be doing. So Mikey didn't have anyone holding his hand, and he tripped over the uneven tunnel floor and fell right on his face, and his glasses broke with a crunch. The tunnel was so noisy, rain thundering against the streets above them, drainage rumbling through the grates and pipes, that Donnie was the only one close enough to hear the crunch. To him, it was the loudest thing in the whole wide world. His little heart flew up in his throat, and he let go of Splinter's rope to turn back to his baby brother. Mikey looked up at him, and his beak was all scraped, and it was sure to bruise, and there was a tiny smear of blood on his lips, but after a dizzy second to sort himself out, he gave Donnie a big smile. He was totally unruffled by things. Even now, Donnie was closer to crying than Mikey was. "Up, Angie?" he said frantically, tugging on him. "You okay?" "Up, up," Mikey parroted, the way he had the habit of doing. He let himself be bullied to his feet, tottering unsteadily for a moment until he could latch onto Donnie's sweaty. "Angie's okay." Letting out all his breath in a relieved sigh, Donnie patted Mikey's head the way Leo always did, and then looked for his glasses. When he found them, he tried not to let his face crumple in the way it felt like his tummy was. The lenses were cracked and the pink plastic frames was in pieces. Mikey's glasses were important and off limits when he and his brothers were playing or roughhouses or being mean and teasing each other. Now they were broken. "I'm okay, Dee," Mikey insisted, pulling on his sleeve. He repeated himself in a simple Japanese and then added, "Promi." Naturally, the 4 turtle siblings, all of them toddlers between the ages of 3 and 6, considered a promise to be every bit as serious as a binding blood oath. When Mikey said it, Donnie knew that Mikey really was actually okay, and his heart stopped thumping behind his shell so hard. "Prom-is," Donnie corrected automatically. He put the pieces of the broken glasses into his pocket and detached them from Mikey's fingers from his sweater so he could hold them instead. "Let's go back to Papa." Only, it wasn't as easy as that. Donnie realized after a minute of careful measured steps, because around their bend there were 2 tunnels ahead of them. Donnie lifted his snout and sniffed, but it was too wet for his family's passing sense to really linger, and the wind and moving water had stirred up other pungent, distracting smells besides. It didn't occur to him to be frightened. Not yet. He was a very smart 4-year-old, and very sheltered on top of that, thanks to a parent hell-bent on protecting him and his siblings from a world that would not understand or appreciate him. He had never met anything he needed to be afraid of. Besides, Angie was right there holding his hand and humming their favorite song. In another universe, Donnie followed Splinter through the right tunnel, with his little brother toddling neatly along behind him. Mikey didn't fall and his glasses didn't break and Donnie didn't get lost. They made it to their Stormtime lair safely and fell asleep in a turtle pile with Raffi and Leo snug and warm and exactly where they belonged. Nothing changed them and they were never apart. In this one, they went the wrong way. When Raph was 5 years old, his little brothers disappeared in the middle of the night. It felt like they were gone for 1 billion years, but it was really only 3 months and 2 days. That's 91 days. He knew because Leo carefully marked the squares on their waterlogged froggy calendar, a brew-crowned frowny face, for each day that Splinter returned without them. It was a really long 91 days, though. He figured that's what 1 billion years must feel like. But where did they go? Raph demanded. The world wasn't very big when he was little. There was their usual home and the sometimes homes that they went to when the weather got noisy and the floors got wet, and the dark cave-like tunnels in between. He didn't understand why Papa didn't just go and get his little brothers and bring them back, since there were only a few places they could be. They got lost, Leo said in his quiet voice. He didn't use his loud voice very much anymore. Mikey was the best one at making him loud and making Leo smile until his dimples popped out and ran all around silly. That's why Mikey needed to be here. Didn't Papa understand that? Looking back as a teenager, Raphael understood the hell Splinter must have gone through. He couldn't leave his 2 eldest by themselves for solid hours at a time to search for his youngest. It probably killed him to do it at all. It definitely must have felt like he was failing Donnie and Mikey by not devoting all of his time and energy solely to finding them. He kept searching long after some parents would have given up. When Raph was 5, he didn't get it. He missed his little brother so much, it made him feel sick, and he wanted Loud Leo back, and it was frustrating that he kept waking up and going to sleep and waking up without them. He felt angry all the time, slomping around the lair and slamming things and talking back instead of being good. When 20 squares had been marked on their calendar, that's 2 tenths, a whole lot of days. Raph spotted the pile of big kid books that Donnie loved. Sometimes, when the books were all wet, and Splinter bought them home, and they had to sit in front of a fan for ages until the books could be touched without tearing apart. The books ended up looking bloated and misshapen when they were dried, but they were Don's treasures. He would read them out loud to his siblings if they asked nice, his lisping voice trudging steadily along, picking its way stubbornly through the words he didn't know. Papa seemed surprised the first time he heard Donnie read. He was almost as good as Leo, who had 2 whole years older than him, and Splinter's surprise made Raph feel proud. That was his smarty pants little brother. But on the day, seeing the books just made Raph angry. He kicked the whole stack until it collapsed in a messy pile that would have made Donnie cry, and it wasn't enough, so he picked up one of the books and threw it as far as he could. He did it again and again until the books were scattered all around the room. Leo watched him with wide eyes the whole time, but he didn't shout at Leo to stop or go tattle on him to Papa. He was quiet, Leo. He only got up when Raffi started crying, and all he did was put his arms around Raph and squeeze him tight until he ran out of tears. Then he led Raph by the hand around the room, and together they carefully picked the books back up and smoothed out the bent pages and stacked them neatly on the far side of the toy shelf. It was so that Donnie would be happy when he finally came home, but it was also so Ralph wouldn't have to see them all the time. And then, on day 91, they didn't need to mark another square on the calendar. They didn't need to. The door burst open and Splinter returned a lot of minutes before he said he would. The big hand on the clock just barely moved from 6 to 7, and he was talking in lullaby-soft Japanese. Too quiet for it to be for Ralph and Leo, all the way over in the kitchen, so he must have been talking to somebody else. Leo jumped to his feet so fast he knocked his juice over. And then Ralph figured it out a second later. Bundled in the blanket in Papa's arms were their little brothers, their missing halves safe and sound and back where they finally belonged. "Hello, Angie," Leo was saying, up on his tiptoes and tugging at the front of Splinter's robes, reaching up as high as he could. His blue eyes were all wet and his mouth wobbling. "Hello, Angie, are you okay? Are they okay, Papa?" "They are cold and hungry," Splinter said gently. "Will their older brothers look after them while I heat water for their bath?" It had been a billion years since Ralphie wasn't the littlest brother, but he hadn't forgotten how to be bigger. When Splinter knelt and set the blanket on the floor, Ralph reached right in and pulled Donnie into his arms. And then he sat down so he could hug Donnie all the way around and dragged him into his lap like a stuffed animal. Donnie didn't hug back, but Ralph didn't care. Ralph squeezed him tight enough for 2 turtles, for 100 turtles. If he held on tight enough, Donnie wouldn't ever get lost again. Mikey's eyes were squinted all the way shut, like a cat in the Wonderland coloring book. He didn't even open them when he clicked wetly at Leo, an anxious, excited turtle sound that meant, "Hello, I am here, hello." He should have opened his eyes so he could tell Leo how much he loved him and was happy to see him, but Leo didn't mind. He didn't mind when Mikey pressed his cold little face against Leo's neck instead. Leo just put his cheek on top of Mikey's head and hummed little turtle sounds back to him. Donnie finally curled one hand into the front of Ralphie's shirt and clung to it. When Ralph looked down, he saw that it was because Donnie's other hand was already holding something pink and plastic. It was so grimy and twisted and out of shape that it took Ralph a minute to remember what it was. "Are those Mickey's glasses?" she asked. "Are they broken?" His lip wobbling, Donnie nodded. "It's okay," Ralph rushed to say immediately. Anything to keep him from crying. He knew that whatever happened must have been an accident, because Mikey was silly but harmless, and Donnie was always careful not to break things unless he could rebuild them. "You did a good job keeping them safe." It must have been the right thing to say, since Don didn't burst into tears. He felt big and strong when Donnie leaned on his head on Ralph's shoulder, his big red eyes drooping like he was sleepy, but the set of his mouth was the very stubborn one Ralph was familiar with from a billion bedtimes. Sure enough, he fought sleep tooth and nail, and he was still fully awake when Papa came back. Splinter rubbed Raphael's cheek with a thumb fondly before he lifted Donnie away. Donnie immediately stretched both of his arms out for Mikey, so Leo reluctantly let Splinter take him too. Mikey still didn't open his eyes, but he made a wide-awake chirp sound at Splinter and knew exactly where Splinter's muzzle was when he reached up with his hands to pat it. Splinter nuzzled his tiny hands carefully, and then the top of Donnie's head, holding them tight against his heart. Raph and Leo followed Splinter so closely that they nearly stepped on him and his tail more than once. The big basin they used for the bath was full of steaming water and shimmering rainbow sheen of soapy bubbles. Splinter lowered Donnie and Mikey in first, and then sighed when Raph and Leo splashed right in after them, but it wasn't an exasperated sigh, or even his "you're about to be in trouble" one. This one sounded like the way his "I love yous" sounded, warm and laughing. They ate ramen for supper, and Raph and Leo had extra noodles because Donnie and Mikey were supposed to only drink the broth. They got the last applesauce cups in the cooler, though, so it wound up being fair. And when it was time to go to sleep, Papa curled around them the way he used to do when they were babies, leaving them in the dark and cold far away. Raffy asked him to leave the lamp on and retrieved the special Magic Treehouse book from where he had been keeping it under the pillow. It was the one Donnie had been reading to them before that story night took him away. He felt his brothers pressing close around him. Leo was hugging Donnie against the way he'd held Mikey earlier. Mikey's head was pillowed on Raph's plastron, and the tiny curve of his shell fitting in Raph's arm perfectly. The tip of Splinter's tail swept idly back and forth, creating a painful swooping shadow in the lantern light. Raph felt funny, like he wanted to cry and laugh at the same time, but he took a deep breath and found the right spot on the page he'd been practicing. Annie knelt down and put her arm around Barry's giant head, Ralph read carefully, tracing the way with his finger. He licked her as she clutched him. "Tell me, Annie," Jack urged her. Annie lifted Barry's ear and whispered into it for a long time. Jack couldn't hear all that she said, but he caught the words love and all my life. He wasn't as good as Donnie and Leo, but no one interrupted him once. Even Mikey laid still and listened without squirming or singing to himself. Ralph read for them until he couldn't keep his eyes open anymore. When he woke up in the morning, dogs in the dead of night had fallen shut in his hand, and his brothers had twisted and turned in their sleep, and Splinter was preparing breakfast across the room, but besides that, everything was exactly where Raphael had left it. Nothing else had gone missing in the dark. It would take a lot more days than just that one for him to stop be worried about it, though. For pretty much as long as Leo could remember, Donnie and Mikey had always been on each other's team first. They were the textbook example of a dynamic duo. It would be cute if it wasn't so annoying. Donnie, Leo said in a level tone, reaching into the far corners of his body for patience. I'm giving you the chance to tell me the truth before Splinter gets here. Where did you get this stuff? The stuff in question was very clearly brand new. Some of it was still in its box. It was equipment that Leonardo couldn't make heads or tails of, and he refused to agree with Raph's mad scientist moniker out loud on principle, but sometimes he had to admit to himself that Raph might have a point. Donnie's hull wouldn't have looked out of place of an episode of Dexter's Laboratory. Donnie's eyes narrowed, his arms tightening around his oversized satchel. He sized Leo up for a solid 10 seconds, visibly gauging how much he could get away with at the moment. Then, predictably, he glanced over at Mikey. Mikey was sitting on the kitchen counter, with a bowl of pineapple chunks in one hand, plastic Hello Kitty chopsticks in another, swinging his feet and watching the scene play out with mild interest. The youngest turtle tilted his head, huffing out a displeased breath. Donnie faced Leo again. I found it, he said grudgingly. He was only 9 years old, and not even the FBI would be able to crack him. Leonardo was going to give it his best shot anyways. Where? Leonardo stressed. Dad doesn't even like you going out to the junkyard by yourself. I know you didn't find this stuff in the garbage. Humans throw away good stuff all the time, Donnie said, sticking to his story. Remember the fountain pen? Oh my god, Dee, Leo groaned. You mean the one you bring up every time you get in trouble for dumpster diving without permission? Raph piped up from the peanut gallery. He was sprawled comfortably on the couch, magazine in hand. Spike, a cozy little lump under his shirt. That fountain pen? I looked it up online and it retailed over $5,000. Donnie went on, doggedly. Okay, yes, people throw valuable things away, Leo agreed, exasperated. Did they throw away this stuff, though? Or did you break into a government building again? Like when you decided you need the, what's it called? Alculators? Acculators, Donnie corrected him. And it wasn't a government building. It was in one of the labs at NYU. Then, after a beat, you can't prove that I did it. Don, give me the bag. Donnie glanced towards Mikey again. Mikey clicked at him. It definitely didn't sound like a, you should listen to your brother, click. Sensing where this was going a second too late, Leo made a grab for him. But Donnie moved at the same time. He sprinted into his lab at full ninja speed, stolen goods in tow, and the reinforced doors closed behind him with a decisive thud. Raph howled with laughter in the living room. Leo let his forehead thunk against the lab doors and groaned. The soft tap of a walking stick made him roll his head to the side without lifting it. Splinter's whiskers twitched in amusement, even though his expression gave nothing away. I see that my second youngest is engaged in yet another battle of wills. Is Donatello immediately in danger? Only from himself, Leo muttered. And me when I get my hands on him. In that case, we can only wait him out, Splinter said wisely, continuing on his way into the kitchen. He will get hungry eventually. Mikey smiled sweetly at their father and offered him some pineapple. Splinter turned down the fruit but rubbed the top of Mikey's head affectionately, further proving Leo's thesis that Michelangelo could do no wrong in the rat's eyes. The kid literally just aided and abetted a repeated offender, and he got head rubs. Donnie snuck above ground for the third time that week, and it was only Tuesday, and he probably wouldn't even get scolded. It's more complicated than that, Leo sometimes had to remind himself. Donnie and Mikey survived without their family for 3 months when they were little more than babies. And, in part, Splinter had solemnly informed Leo and Raph as they got older they were only able to do so by venturing to the surface for food and clean water and warm things to nest in. Out of necessity, they acclimated to living between the two worlds. They didn't have the deeply ingrained anxiety surrounding humans and human places that Leo had inherited from Splinter. They didn't have the healthy disdain for people that Raph had either. Leo was pretty sure they only stayed underground at all because they were fond of the lair and didn't want to give their dad and siblings heart attacks by springing an apartment on them. He slunk down into the sunken living room and collapsed onto the sofa. Being the oldest was a thankless job and horrible, and Leo wanted a new job. Raph nudged his knee with his foot. Don gave that fancy fountain pen to Splinter for his birthday, the red-banded turtle reminded Leo. He may be an evil genius, but he's our evil genius, and Mikey would probably stop him before he did anything really bad. Unless it was funny, Mikey called over. Unless it was funny, Raph conceded. Leo buried his face in a cushion and groaned again. Sometimes this family could be so annoying. But somewhere, in the back of his mind, a well-kept secret from everybody else, even himself sometimes, Leonardo was always a little bit relieved every time Donnie acted bratty and clung to his stupid treasures, every time Mikey started talking his family ears off about some comic book or new cartoon. He had a vague, fuzzy memory of a Mikey who wouldn't speak in the human language at all, of a Donnie that picked through toys and books listlessly uninterested in everything that he used to love. And he knew they were the annoying versions of his brothers and were the ones that he wanted to keep. April was having a really, really, really bad day when she first met the best friends she'd ever have. She was trudging home from the bus stop, all wet from a puddle of a speeding car that had splashed on her, damp book bag full of homework that she didn't want to do, in an essay she got a C on because English was so stupid, and literary analysis was stupid, and the stupid green light at the end of the stupid dock was stupid. It had nothing to do with tomorrow being Mother's Day. She was cutting through the side street to get back to her apartment faster when suddenly her foot caught on something hard and unforgiving, and she pitched forward with a screech. Her bag busted a seam when it fell, and the book in the folders scattered magnificently around the dirty alley, and April had just about had it. She burst into tears. Today was horrible, and she hated her new school, and she just wanted to be home with her dad already, even if their new place was stuffy and cramped and not as comfortable as the one they lived in with Mom. Nothing was as comfortable when Mom was there, though. April was crying so hard she didn't hear it at first. A gentle, rolling, rumbling noise like a car engine, only it would have had to be a really little car. It was so out of place that it distracted April from her tears. She looked around to find the source of it, rubbing her face dry with the inside of her shirt. The first thing April saw was the manhole cover. It was lifted slightly instead of laying down flat, which must have been what tripped her over. The second thing she saw was the round blue eyes peering at her from the darkness underneath. April was 12 years old, and nothing was surprised for her for very long. She shoved the hood of her yellow jacket off and demanded, "What are you doing down there?" The eyes blinked at her. Furiously, she said, "You made me fall!" "He said he was sorry," another voice said from directly behind her. She looked and found a boy staring back at her. He was a few inches shorter than she was, and dressed in mixed-matched layers of clothing that looked all too big on a skinny body. He was wearing a floppy beanie and a purple mask that was holding something big and square and wrapped in a tarp. It was so much to take in that it took April an additional second to register that his skin was green. April was so taken aback by the sudden appearance of a green boy that she completely missed the dull, near-silent sound of the manhole cover grating over concrete. She scrambled back when the green boy moved towards her, and then felt silly because he wasn't moving towards her at all. He was carrying the thing he was holding over to the manhole. "What is that?" she asked curiously. "Microwave oven," he said, holding it a little closer against his stomach, like she was going to snatch it from him. There was no danger of that. April tried moving her own microwave to a different counter once to make room for her dad's new coffee maker, and she could barely make it 2 feet with the thing. And that was a normal microwave. This one looked like it belonged in a kitchen restaurant somewhere. In fact, April squinted and made out a sticker on the side that said, "Property of Rupert's Management." He certainly wasn't old enough to be the manager of anything. From the defensive way he was holding the appliance, April was pretty sure he wasn't supposed to have it. 2 hands reached out of the manhole, green and 3-fingered just like the boys. He passed one of his ill-gotten gains down to him, carefully lowering the whole heavy, bulky thing into the tunnel. It slipped and fell a few inches, and then the boy snapped something in what sounded very much like fluent Japanese, and from underground, where April couldn't see, the owner of the blue eyes giggled. After watching for a moment, it occurred to April that her stuff was still sitting around, slowly getting soaked in the rain-wet alley. She made a fed-up noise under her breath and scuttled over on her hands and knees at some point, to the annoying task of picking it all up. At some point, she heard April rustle to her nest. "The green light symbolizes Gatsby's dreams of the future," the boy said abruptly. "Not just his love for Daisy. It gave him hope. People like to say that it's a book about the condemnation of the American dream, but it's really about wanting more than you have, no matter how rich or poor you are." April sat up on her knees to find him reading her essay, flipping through the stapled pages with a halfway interested look on his face. He glanced up at her, not quite making eye contact, then back down at his hands again. "I like what you wrote, though," he muttered. "I would have given you a B at least." It was the nicest thing anyone had said to her all day, and it crystallized in April's memory as the exact moment she knew that she was keeping this weird little microwave thief no matter what. Sometimes Mikey got quiet. He didn't mean to, he tried not to, and Donnie said it was okay if he didn't want to talk to the way people did. Mikey was a person, but he was a turtle too. His siblings could understand him if they tried. Donnie would always understand him. Papa thought that Mikey was too young to remember those months he and Donnie were alone. For the most part, he was right. Mikey's memory of that time were all disjointed and hazy things. Mostly things he'd dream about, though. But Papa was wrong, too. There were some things that Mikey kept. When Leo turned 16, Splinter finally allowed her to lead the team to the surface. By then, they were all familiar with New York City. Mikey and Donnie dressed in the layers and ventured up whenever it suited them, and Leo had hunted them down to drag them home at least 1,000 times, and even Ralph could be coaxed topside shenanigans if April promised there was junk foods and horror movies on the other end. They weren't new to the world, but they were new to the criminal underside of it. Well, they could practice kata and spar with each other for hours in the dojo, but it was much different fighting a stranger with butterfly knife or brass knuckles who didn't care about them at all. Mikey was unsettled by it when his siblings gathered at the morning breakfast table nursing aches and bruises the morning after their first fight. Papa was unhappy too, his tail thrashing in agitation even while his face remained thoughtful and impassive. He listened to Leo explain so earnestly that if she had the power to help people, it meant she had the responsibility to. It was hard to argue with that. Mikey busied himself with tying his sister's blue mask tails up, fluffed in a puffy bow the way she secretly liked it a lot, waiting for Papa's inevitable sigh. "You are burdened with wisdom beyond your years, Leonarda," the rat finally said. He always took great care to say Leo's chosen name properly, ever since she came out to the family when she disclosed that she was actually a girl. Even now, during this tense conversation, the acknowledgement made Leo sit a little bit taller. "I want you to promise me that you'll be careful," Splinter goes on, "with your puzzles and yourself." "Of course," she was quick to agree. "I promise, Dad." Only stupid Leo was a big fat liar, because the first chance she got to fling herself into danger, that's what she did. And it was really annoying when Mikey was done being terrified. He was going to be very, very angry. On this particular night, they had split into 2 teams to cover as much ground as they possibly could. The purple dragon's den was somewhere along the waterline, and Leo wanted to find it. So Donnie and Ralph were canvassing on the other side of the docks, where the purple dragons found Mikey and his sister. The odds were immediately bad. Something like 12 thugs against 2 ninja turtles. Even with their training, they were still only 16 and 13 years old. They had brushed up against violence before, but not the organized kind. Donnie's voice got panicked in Mikey's ear, guessing what his and Leo's tense silence meant. And then Raph started cursing up a storm, and Mikey could tell from the way their breaths got fast and punchy over the comms that they were both sprinting over there as fast as they could. But Mikey didn't think that was going to matter, because one of the men pulled a gun from his waistband. He was saying something, but Mikey's thoughts were all underwater. He was clutching at his chucks so hard, he could feel the scores on the handles biting into his palm. When the gun went off, he was pushed down, and his head was knocked into a shipping crate hard enough that he saw stars behind his eyes. He had to blink a few times to find Leo. She was hovering above him. Her carapace was turned outwards towards the man with the gun. She was holding Mikey like she expected one of them to be about to lose the other. She was bleeding. She looked afraid. Mikey closed his eyes and let the quiet out. It filled his whole body like the first gulp of hot chocolate on a blistery winter day. It made him remember being somewhere damp and dark, smaller than he was now, cornered by a big animal, Donnie's wheezing, rattling breaths behind him, and the weak press of his fever-hot hands on Mikey's shell. But it wasn't scary to remember that. It made everything very simple. He knew what to do. "Mikey," someone was saying. "Hey, Mikey, Angie." When he blinked his eyes open and looked up, the warehouse was empty. There were a few limp human bodies strewn within his line of sight, but when he turned to look for the rest of them, a hand caught his chin and held him still. He followed the hand back to Donnie. He was looking at Mikey the way he always did, like they were each other's first and best and forever friend. "There you are," Donnie said, and smiled. Mikey tried to smile back, but his mouth tasted like metal and salt, and his jaw was sore. When he touched his face, his fingers came away sticky and red. It was all down his chin and throat. He didn't know how it got there. He looked up at Donnie again, and then past him where their brother and sister were hovering. The second Mikey saw Leo and the hastily covered bandages on her arm, he remembered that obscene crack of the gun shooting at her, and he started to cry. Leo practically trampled over Raph and Donnie in her rush to get her arms around Mikey. She didn't care that he was all messy and ugly, and she was pressing her beak to the top of her head, clicking and cooing the way she hadn't since they were children. Then Raph picked Mikey up and tucked Mikey's head under his chin, and they went to April's apartment, which was 20 minutes closer to the dock than the lair. The trip across Manhattan was brighter and warmer than winding subway tunnels home would have been. Someone must have called ahead to warn them, because April and her dad were worried but not horrified at the picture the turtles made on their way to the fire escape. April sat in the bathtub with Mikey in a tight enough fit that their knees and elbows knocked together. She used the handheld shower to get the blood off him. It ruined her pajamas, but she didn't care. She was like his big sister, too. By the time Mikey was released, his smelling like April's mango body wash and wrapped in his favorite fluffy Hello Kitty blanket, Mr. O'Neill had finished stitching Leo's arm, and she was pacing tight circles around the kitchen, lost in her own world. "Okay, Fearless, he's here," Raph said, clearly fed up with her. "Go smother the kid already and get it out of your system so we can eat already." Mikey was still mad at Leo, but he could save that for later. For now, he wanted to lean on her and feel that steady, reassuring marathon march of her heart, while his human family and turtle family piled into the living room with paper plates of greasy cheese pizza. Mr. O'Neill called Splinter way before he ordered the food, so Papa would be there any minute. They didn't turn the TV on, they just sat together and talked in low voices until Raph said, "Where'd we leave off, Don?" And Donnie made an "oh yeah" sort of noise and scrolled through his phone. They'd been rereading one of their favorite books together to pass the time during boring patrols and endless stakeouts. Donnie passed Raph his phone because Ralphie did it best. For the 100th time, she closed her eyes. She could see another room in her mind's eye, Ralph read, with the compassionate silence of the room. One of the curtains full of stars and a mattress surrounded by books that whispered their stories to her at night. The quiet inside of Mikey's mind was docile and passive now, a dangerous animal and deep in hibernation. But it was still there. Maybe it always would be. But Leo was hugging him like nothing about him had changed, and Ralph was reading The Thief Lord, the way he used to read Magic Tree House when they were little, and Donnie's hand was wrapped around Mikey's like a promise. Mikey's earliest memory was just like that. It was Donnie holding his hand, walking next to him, all through the dark. Once, when Mikey and Donnie were very, very small, they went the wrong way. Their turtle instincts kept them moving, kept them scrounging for survival. Maybe if they'd been human toddlers, they would have stayed put and made it easier for their father to track them down. Maybe they would have only been out there for a few days, a week at most. Or maybe they would have fallen into the deep runoff and drowned, or gotten eaten by subway rats, or died of exposure. Donnie remembers more than he thinks anyone in his family is aware that he does. A true photogenic memory has never been proven, but frankly, that's only one item in the long laundry list of items of reasons why a scientist worth their salt would love to get their hands on him. Donnie can recall everything he's ever seen. He's done a lot of reading on childhood trauma and the way that it can affect toddlers and even babies going forward. 3 months in the grand scheme of things is not a remarkably long time, and they could have come out of that situation a whole lot worse than he did. Mikey's eyes weren't irreparably damaged by the long strict he went without his classes, by the grace of some imaginary god. But, in part, that's because he learned to get around without his eyes at all. Donnie's baby brother taught him how to echolocate using their subvocal turtle noises to see in the dark, the way their red-eared slider cousins use vibrations to see through murky water. Nowadays, it's mostly a parlor trick they get to use to get the better of their big siblings. Sometimes, during morning training, after Leo had beaten Mikey and Ralph had beaten Donnie, and Ralph went on to be a really sore winner about beating Leo, Splinter would tap his walking stick and call Ralph back onto the mat. "Now you will spar against your younger brothers together," the rat would say mildly, knowing exactly what he was doing. Ralph's smug face would fall, and Leo would settle on the sidelines with a beaming smile on her face. On their own, Mikey and Donnie were both talented ninjas who were easily distracted during practice and only trained as much as they required to. Together, they were monsters. "Okay," Ralph said, lifting his hands wearily. "Let's talk about this." Mikey winked at him and closed his eyes. Raphael swore. Leona smothered her laughter, but Donnie could still hear it, rising and filling the dojo in gentle waves. Donatello remembers being lost. He remembers how the days blurred together, dark and frightening, the maze-like tunnels crying and crying for Splinter before he finally learning that no one would come when he cried. He remembers getting sick, a bad chest cold that was no match for his mutated DNA, but gave him a rough time for the few days that it managed to stick. He remembers the big, ugly rats that stalked them to their makeshift nest, and the tiny curve of his little brother's shell when Mikey went on all fours and bared his teeth and protected Donnie from the creatures that would only hurt him in the only way he could. He remembers the first time they crawled out of the sewers, how they didn't want to break Papa's most important rule, but they were so hungry. He remembers seeing the city lights for the first time, neon and electric and dizzying, the brightest thing in the whole world. He remembers how the fear began to fade and what was scary became normal, and all he needed to do to feel safe was his little Angie behind him. "Tello," Leona calls out from the den. "Get your shell in here or we'll leave without you." "No, you won't. I have the keys," Donnie calls back. He saves the design he's working on, a wrist-mounted crossbow for Casey's upcoming 17th birthday, and smiles to himself, imagining the horrified look on Leo's and April's faces and the elated one on Casey's when he finds out Donnie's present's the gift. It's going to be sweet chaos. And that he's doing it for a cute boy makes it even sweeter. He steps out of his lab and finds his siblings lingering by the turnstiles, waiting for him. Mikey is giving goodbye kisses to Clunk's little orange face, acting every bit as though he's going to be leaving the country for a calendar year, instead of just, going out for a few hours. Ralph looks like he's about 3 seconds from dragging their baby brother out of their lair by his mask's tails. Leo has her hands on her hips, a full harried single mom mode, even though Splinter is right there. "Finally," she says when she spots Donnie. "Ready to go?" "Can I drive?" Mikey blurts out before anyone else can say anything. "What? Of course not, Donnie refuses immediately, a scandalized look on his face. He smiles up at Splinter when he passes him, and leans into the one-armed hug when the rat gives him parting. The moment they hopped into the turnstiles and left the lights of the station behind, Donnie tosses Mikey the keys to the shell racer and says, "Go wild." Michelangelo whoops and takes off down the tracks. Raphael barks a surprised laugh, and Leo says, "Oh, hell no!" And the tunnels echo with the sounds of Donatello's family, rowdy and reckless and irresponsible. He and Mikey got lost when they were little, but they ended up right where they were supposed to be. And that was A Minute from Home by Tazi. They are a delightful writer. You should please go check them out. I love everything they have ever written. They're delightful. Thank you all for listening, and I will see you guys next time. I'm sorry that I didn't get all of the voices right and that I messed up on some of the words, fumbling over them. But thank you all for listening, and I hope you all have a wonderful day, and I will see you guys next time. Bye!